Talon Red Mesa was the kind of man you crossed the street to avoid. Apache blood, war scars, a temper that kept even the drunk cowhands quiet when he rode into town. He lived alone on cursed land where nothing grew and nobody visited. Then the train brought her. Elena Vale, a mail-order bride he never expected, beautiful enough to start rumors and strong enough to scare him. Within weeks, the desert tried to kill them both. Within months, a man from her past arrived with legal papers and a loaded threat. She belonged to him, not some half-breed rancher with dirt under his nails. That's when everything went to hell. If you want to see how two broken people fought an entire town, the desert, and the law itself just to stand together, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The land didn't forgive mistakes. Talon Red Mesa knew that better than most. He stood at the fence line of his ranch, squinting into the white-hot glare of an Arizona afternoon, watching dust devils spin across the flats like they had business elsewhere. The goats huddled under the single cottonwood tree, ribs showing through their hides. The water in the stock tank was low again. Everything was low. Rain hadn't fallen in 4 months, and the creek that used to run year-round now barely trickled mud. He pulled his hat lower and turned back toward the house, if you could call it that. Adobe walls, flat roof, 2 rooms and a lean-to for the animals. It wasn't much, but it was his. He'd built it with his own hands after the war, after he came back to nothing. The town of Mesquite Bend sat 5 miles east, close enough to need, far enough to avoid. Talon only went in when he had to. The stairs never stopped. The whispers followed him down every street. Apache bastard, savage, half-breed. He'd heard it all. Didn't matter that he'd fought for the Union. Didn't matter that he paid his bills on time. Didn't matter that he kept to himself. To them, he was something that didn't belong. He used to care. Now he just survived. Inside, the house was dim and cooler by a few degrees. Talon poured himself water from the clay jug and drank it standing at the window. His reflection stared back from the dusty glass, broad shoulders, copper skin, a scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. War wound, shrapnel from a cannon that killed 3 men beside him and left him with a headache that never fully went away. There was a time when this place had felt like a future. That was before Maria, before the fever took her and the baby both, 3 winters ago. He'd buried them on the hill behind the house, under stones he'd carried up one at a deal. After that, he stopped planning. He just worked. But the drought was winning. Talon set the cup down and looked at the letter on the table. He'd written it 2 weeks ago, late at night when the silence got too loud. It was a stupid idea, desperate. But desperation had a way of making stupid ideas look reasonable. He'd answered an advertisement in a newspaper someone left at the feed store. Mail-order brides. Honest women seeking honest work out west. The ad made it sound practical. Business-like, no romance, no promises, just 2 people agreeing to survive together. That's what he'd written, no flowery language, no lies. I need a woman who can work. I have land, goats, a house. It's hard country. I'm not easy company. If you can live with that, write back. He'd expected nothing. Maybe that's why he sent it. But 3 days ago, a reply came. I'll come. I don't need easy. I need honest. Arriving September 14th, Mesquite Bend Station. Ite email short. Direct. No questions. Talon read it 5 times, trying to figure out what kind of woman wrote like that. Someone running, probably. Same as him. That was fine. He wasn't looking for a saint. September 14th was today. He checked his pocket watch. The train was due in an hour. Talon grabbed his coat and headed for the barn. His horse, a gray mare named Dust, lifted her head as he approached. She was old, steady, the only living thing on this ranch that didn't look at him like he owed it something. Come on, he muttered, swinging the saddle onto her back. Let's get this over with. The ride into town took 40 minutes. The road was rutted, baked hard by the sun, lined with scrub and cactus that looked half dead. Talon passed one other ranch on the way. Belonged to a man named Cutter, who'd made it clear years ago that he didn't want Apache neighbors. Talon rode past without looking. Mesquite Bend came into view slowly, shimmering in the heat. It wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a hotel, and the train depot. Maybe 200 people lived there, most of them stubborn enough to think the desert owed them prosperity. Talon tied Dust to the rail outside the depot and stepped onto the platform. A few people were already waiting. 2 older women in bonnets, a man in a suit who looked like he sold something nobody needed, a kid with a crate of chickens. They all glanced at Talon, then looked away. He leaned against a post and waited. The train was late. 15 minutes. 20. Then he heard it. Distant whistle, low rumble growing louder. The women straightened their skirts. The man checked his watch. Talon just watched the horizon. The locomotive came around the bend trailing black smoke, brakes screaming as it slowed. It lurched to a stop with a hiss of steam, and the conductor hopped down, shouting something about freight and passengers. A handful of people stepped off. A family with 3 kids, an old man with a trunk, a cowhand looking for work. Then her. Talon didn't move, but something in his chest tightened. She was young, maybe mid-20s. Dark hair pulled back in a braid, simple gray dress, a single canvas bag in her hand. And beautiful. Not in a soft way. In the way a knife was beautiful. Clean lines, sharp edges, something you handled carefully. That wasn't what he'd asked for. She looked around the platform, calm, like she'd done this 100 times. Then her eyes found him. She didn't smile, just walked straight toward him, boots clicking on the wood. Talon Red Mesa? Her voice was low, steady. That's me. She set her bag down. Elena Vale. They stood there, sizing each other up. She didn't flinch from his scar, didn't glance away from his eyes, didn't look like she needed saving. I wasn't expecting... He stopped himself. No point finishing that sentence. You wrote for a woman who could work, she said. I can work. That all you brought? He nodded at the bag. It's all I need. Talon picked it up, light. Whatever she'd left behind, it wasn't much. My horse is this way. He turned, and she followed without hesitation. But he felt the stares, every person on that platform watching them walk away together. The whispers started before they even reached Dust. Did you see her? What's a woman like that doing with him? She doesn't know what she's gotten into. Elena didn't react, didn't slow down. Talon tied her bag to the saddle and swung up, then reached down. She took his hand, stepped into the stirrup, and settled behind him like she'd ridden double before. Hold on, he said. Her arms circled his waist, firm but not tight. He kicked Dust into a trot, and they left Mesquite Bend in a cloud of dust. They didn't talk on the ride back. The sun was starting to dip, turning the sky orange and purple. The wind picked up, cooler now, carrying the smell of sage and dry earth. When the ranch came into view, Talon felt a flicker of something close to embarrassment. It looked worse than he remembered. The fence sagged in places. The well pump was rusted. The house sat low and lonely against the hills, surrounded by nothing but rock and scrub. He reined Dust to a stop in front of the house and dismounted, then helped Elena down. She stood there, looking around. No judgment on her face. No disappointment either, just taking it in. It's not much, Talon said. You told me that in the letter. She glanced at him. You weren't lying. He almost smiled. Almost. I'll show you inside. The house was cooler than outside, but still warm. Talon lit a lantern and set it on the table. The main room had a stove, a table, 2 chairs, shelves with canned goods and flour. A door led to the bedroom, another to the lean-to. Elena set her bag down and walked the perimeter, running her fingers along the wall, checking the stove, peering into the water basin. You built this yourself? Most of it. She nodded. It's solid. Roof leaks when it rains, but it hasn't rained in a while. Where do I sleep? The question hung there. Talon hadn't thought it through. The bed was in the other room. There was a cot in the lean-to, but it was filthy, buried under tools and feed sacks. I'll take the lean-to, he said. You take the bed. Elena turned to face him. That's your bed. You're a guest. I'm your wife. Or I will be, if that's still the plan. The word wife sounded strange out loud. Talon cleared his throat. We'll figure it out. For now, you take the bed. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. Talon grabbed a blanket and headed for the lean-to. It smelled like hay and goat dung, but it would do. He cleared off the cot, shook out the blanket, and lay down, staring at the ceiling. He could hear her moving around in the house, water splashing, the soft thud of boots being set aside. Then silence. Talon closed his eyes, But sleep didn't come easy. His mind kept circling back to the platform, to the way people had looked at her, at him, at them together. This was a mistake. Beautiful women didn't survive out here. They got swallowed up by the land or by the men who thought they deserved them. And Elena, she might be strong, but strength only got you so far when the whole world was stacked against you. He'd brought her into his mess. Now he'd have to live with it. Morning came too soon. Talon woke to the sound of metal clanging, someone working the pump outside. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and stepped into the early light. Elena was at the well, hauling water into a bucket. She'd changed into a plain work dress, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. She didn't look like she'd just arrived. She looked like she'd been here for years. "You're up early," Talon said. "So are you." She carried the bucket to the house without asking for help. Talon followed her inside. She'd already started a fire in the stove, already set out cups and a pot for coffee. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I know." She poured water into the pot. "But I'm not the kind of woman who sits around waiting to be useful." Talon leaned against the door frame, watching her move through the space like she owned it. No hesitation, no second guessing, just work. "You always like this?" he asked. "Like what?" "Quiet. Efficient." She glanced at him. "You complaining?" "No." "Good." She handed him a cup. "Because I'm not changing." The coffee was strong, bitter, exactly how he liked it. They drank in silence, standing on opposite sides of the room. Finally, Elena set her cup down. "What needs doing today?" "Goats need feeding. Fence needs mending. Water tank's low." "Show me." Talon led her outside. The goats bleated when they saw him coming, crowding toward the gate. There were 12 of them, scraggly and half wild, the last remnants of a herd that used to number 50. Elena stepped into the pen without flinching. One of the bucks charged her, testing. She sidestepped, grabbed him by the horns, and shoved him back. "Hey, behave!" The buck snorted and backed off. Talon raised an eyebrow. "You've done this before. My father kept goats, and chickens, and a temper." She brushed dust off her hands. "I learned early how to handle things that don't listen." They worked through the morning. Elena hauled feed, mucked out the pen, patched a hole in the fence with wire Talon handed her. She didn't complain, didn't slow down, didn't ask for breaks. By noon, Talon was starting to wonder who the hell Vale really was. They ate lunch in the shade, bread, hard cheese, water. Elena sat on an overturned crate, wiping sweat from her forehead. "How long have you been out here alone?" she asked. 3 years. "And before that?" Talon hesitated. "I had a wife. And a son. They died." Elena didn't flinch, didn't offer hollow sympathy, just nodded. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." "Doesn't make it easier." "No, it didn't." She took a drink of water, then looked at him directly. "You should know something. I didn't come out here because I wanted adventure. I came because I had no other choice. That makes 2 of us. I left people behind, debts, trouble. If it follows me here, I'll deal with it, but I won't let it touch you." Talon met her eyes. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that wears a suit and calls itself respectable." Her jaw tightened. "My father owed money to a banker. When he died, the banker decided I was part of the collateral." "He tried to collect?" "He tried." She looked away. "I didn't let him." Talon didn't press. Whatever she'd done to get free, it was hers to carry. "If he comes looking," Talon said slowly, "he'll find more than he bargained for." Elena's gaze snapped back to him. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or relief. "You don't owe me that," she said. "No, but I don't let people get pushed around on my land." For the first time since she'd arrived, Elena smiled. Small, brief, but real. "All right then." They went back to work. The first week passed in a blur of heat, dust, and labor. Elena fit into the rhythm of the ranch like she'd always been there. She cooked, mended, hauled water, tended the goats. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was sharp and to the point. Talon found himself watching her more than he meant to, the way she moved, the way she handled things, the way she didn't need him to tell her what to do. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something closer to respect. On the 8th day, the sky changed. Clouds rolled in from the west, dark and heavy, moving fast. The air thickened, charged. Talon felt it in his bones, storm coming, and not a small one. "Get the goats inside," he called to Elena. She was already moving, herding them toward the lean-to. Talon secured the fence, checked the roof ties, hauled loose tools into the barn. The first drops fell fat and cold. Then the wind hit. It came like a wall, bending the cottonwood, tearing at the roof. Rain followed in sheets, blinding, deafening. Talon grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the house. They stumbled inside, soaking wet, just as lightning split the sky. Elena slammed the door. Jesus! Talon checked the window. Water was already pooling in the yard, running downhill in muddy rivers. Then he heard it, splintering wood. "The lean-to," he said. Elena turned. "The goats." "I know." He grabbed a rope and headed back out into the storm. Elena followed without hesitation. The lean-to was collapsing. One wall had caved in, and water was flooding through, panicking the goats. They were trapped, thrashing, bleeding. Talon waded in, shouting over the wind, "Get the gate open!" Elena fought her way to the latch, yanked it free. Talon grabbed the first goat, dragged it toward the opening. Elena caught it, shoved it through. One by one, they pulled them out. The last one, a young doe, was pinned under a fallen beam. Talon heaved it up, and Elena dragged the animal free just as the rest of the roof gave way. They ran. Back to the house, rain hammering them, wind screaming. They fell through the door, gasping, covered in mud and blood and God knows what else. The goats huddled in the corner, shaking. Elena collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Talon looked at her, soaked, filthy, eyes blazing, and something cracked open inside him. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, breathless. "You?" "Yeah." They sat there in the wreckage of the storm, listening to the rain pound the roof. And for the first time in 3 years, Talon didn't feel alone. The storm blew itself out by dawn, leaving the ranch looking like a battlefield. Talon stepped outside into mud that sucked at his boots with every step. The lean-to was gone, just splintered wood and twisted metal scattered across the yard. The fence had sections ripped clean away. The water tank had overflowed and carved a new gully straight through what used to be the vegetable patch. Elena emerged behind him, wrapped in a blanket, hair still damp from the night before. She surveyed the damage without speaking, then walked to where the goats huddled near the house. "They made it," she said quietly. "Barely." Talon kicked at a piece of roofing. The whole structure would need rebuilding. That meant lumber, nails, time he didn't have. And money he definitely didn't have. Elena crouched beside the youngest doe, the one they'd pulled from under the beam. The animal's leg was swollen, bent at an angle that made Talon's stomach turn. "Broken," Elena said. "I'll put her down." "Not yet." Elena stood, brushing mud off her hands. "Let me try something first." She disappeared into the house and came back with strips of cloth and 2 flat pieces of wood. Talon watched as she knelt beside the doe again, speaking in a low voice he couldn't quite hear. The animal struggled, but Elena held her steady, wrapping the leg with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before, too," Talon said. "My father broke his arm when I was 15. Doctor was 3 days away. I figured it out." She tied off the splint. "She'll need to stay off it for a few weeks. If infection doesn't set in, she might pull through." "And if it does?" "Then you put her down." Elena looked up at him. "But we give her a chance first." Talon nodded. He helped her move the doe into a corner of the house where she'd be dry and still. The other goats followed, curious, bleating their complaints about the accommodations. They spent the rest of the morning salvaging what they could. Talon pulled nails from broken boards while Elena sorted through soaked feed, separating what might dry from what was already rotting. The sun climbed higher, turning the mud into a sticky mess that clung to everything. Around noon, Elena straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "We need supplies." "I know." "How much money do you have?" Talon hesitated. The question was blunt, practical, but it still felt like exposing a wound. "Not enough for lumber. Maybe enough for nails and some feed if I trade the rest." "Trade what?" "2 of the goats." Elena frowned. "You can't afford to lose 2 goats. Can't afford to let the rest starve either." He tossed a broken board onto the pile. "It's how it works out here. You lose a little now, or you lose everything later." She was quiet for a moment, then reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. She opened it and counted out bills, more money than Talon had seen in 6 months. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "I saved it. Took me 4 years, She held it out. "Use it." Talon stared at the money. "That's yours." "It's ours. We need lumber. We need feed. You said we're in this together, didn't you?" He had. But taking her money felt different than sharing work. It felt like borrowing something he couldn't pay back. "I'll pay you back," he said. "I'm not asking you to." Elena pressed the pouch into his hand. "Just build the damn lean-to so the goats don't sleep in the house." Despite everything, Talon almost smiled. He pocketed the money. "All right, I'm coming with you." "To town? You think I'm staying here while you do all the work?" She raised an eyebrow. "Besides, I want to see what kind of place you've been avoiding." Talon wanted to argue. The town wasn't kind. People would talk. They'd stare. They'd make assumptions. But Elena had already turned away, heading into the house to change into something cleaner. He saddled Dust and hitched the small cart they used for hauling. By the time Elena came out, she'd braided her hair tight and put on a dark blue dress that looked almost respectable. She climbed onto the cart without waiting for help. Talon flicked the reins and they started down the rutted road toward Mesquite Bend. The ride took longer with the cart. The storm had left the road worse than before, full of standing water and deep ruts. Dust picked her way carefully, ears flicking back every time the wheels hit a rock. Elena didn't talk much, but Talon caught her looking around, taking in the empty horizon, the scrub, the distant mesas that rose like broken teeth against the sky. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Coming out here. Staying." Talon thought about that. "Every day for the first year. After that, regret didn't seem to matter much." "What changed?" "Nothing. I just got used to it." He glanced at her. "You regretting it yet?" "Not yet." She smiled, just a little. "Ask me again after I meet the town." They crested a rise and Mesquite Bend came into view. It looked the same as always, low buildings baking in the sun, dust blowing down the main street, a few horses tied outside the saloon. Talon felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came every time he crossed into other people's territory. He pulled the cart up outside the general store and set the brake. A couple of men loitering on the boardwalk stopped talking to watch them. One of them spat into the dirt. Elena climbed down, ignoring them completely. Talon followed her inside. The store smelled like coffee, leather, and old wood. Shelves lined the walls, packed with canned goods, tools, fabric, ammunition. Behind the counter stood Hiram Bosch, the owner, a thin man with a gray beard and eyes that never quite met yours. He looked up when they entered, and his expression went carefully blank. "Talon." "Hiram." Bosch's gaze shifted to Elena, lingered. "Didn't know you had company. This is my wife, Elena." The word still felt strange, but Talon said it firm. Bosch's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Wife? That's so." He didn't sound convinced. "What can I do for you?" "I need lumber, 2x4s, enough to rebuild a lean-to. Nails, 50 pounds of feed." Bosch scratched something on a piece of paper, calculating. "That'll run you steep. Storm hit everyone hard. Prices went up." "How much?" Bosch named a figure that made Talon's jaw tighten. It was double what it should have been, and they both knew it. Elena stepped forward. "That's robbery." Bosch blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Lumber doesn't cost that much, storm or no storm. You're gouging because you think we're desperate." "Ma'am, I don't know how things work where you're from, but I'm from a place where men don't cheat people just because they can." Elena's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Cut the price by a third, or we'll buy somewhere else." "There is nowhere else." "Then I guess you'll lose the sale." She turned toward the door. Talon followed, heart pounding. He'd never walked out on Bosch before. Nobody did. But Elena moved like she'd done it 100 times. "Wait." They stopped. Bosch rubbed his face, sighed. "All right, I'll knock off 20%. That's the best I can do." Elena looked at Talon. He nodded. She turned back to Bosch. "We'll take it." Bosch muttered something under his breath and started pulling lumber from the back. Talon paid with Elena's money, feeling every set of eyes in the store watching them. Two women near the fabric section whispered behind their hands. A man buying tobacco didn't even pretend not to stare. By the time they'd loaded the cart, a small crowd had gathered on the boardwalk. Talon recognized most of them. Ranchers, shopkeepers, the kind of people who made it their business to know everyone else's business. One of them, a heavy-set man named Cutter, stepped forward. "That the mail-order bride, Talon?" Talon didn't answer. Cutter grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "She's a pretty one. Didn't think they sent pretty ones to fellas like you." Elena stopped, looked Cutter dead in the eye. "They send women who aren't afraid of hard work to men who know how to do it. I'd say I ended up in the right place." Cutter's grin faltered. A couple of the men laughed, not kindly. "Feisty too," Cutter said. "Hope you know what you're getting into, girl." "I know exactly what I'm getting into." Elena climbed onto the cart. "Do you?" Talon flicked the reins before anyone could answer. Dust lurched forward, and the cart rattled down the street, leaving the crowd behind. They didn't speak until they were a mile out of town. "You didn't have to do that," Talon said. "Do what?" "Stand up for me." Elena looked at him, surprised. "I wasn't standing up for you. I was standing up for us." "They won't forget it." "Good. Maybe they'll think twice before running their mouths next time." She leaned back, squinting into the sun. "I've dealt with worse than Cutter." "He's not the worst." "Then I'll deal with whoever is." Talon didn't know what to say to that. He'd spent 3 years keeping his head down, staying quiet, letting the town think whatever it wanted. And here was Elena, 1 week in, already drawing lines in the dirt. It should have scared him. Instead, it felt like something cracking open, something he'd kept locked down so long he'd forgotten it was there. They reached the ranch by late afternoon. Talon unloaded the lumber while Elena checked on the goats. The young doe was still alive, still calm. A good sign. Over the next 3 days, they rebuilt the lean-to. Talon cut and measured while Elena hammered, her strikes clean and precise. They didn't talk much, but the work had a rhythm to it. Pass a board, hold it steady, drive the nail home. By the 3rd day, the structure stood solid, roof patched, walls braced. Talon stepped back, wiping sweat from his face. "It'll hold." "Better than the last one," Elena said. That night they ate outside under the stars. The air had cooled, and for the first time in weeks, the wind didn't feel like it was trying to peel the skin off your bones. Elena sat on an overturned bucket, plate balanced on her knees. "You ever think about leaving? This place?" "Yeah." Talon shook his head. "Nowhere else to go." "There's always somewhere else." "Not for me." He poked at his food. "I tried. After the war, went east for a while. Didn't fit. People looked at me like I was something that crawled out of the ground." "So you came back?" "To land nobody wanted. Figured if I was going to be alone, might as well be alone somewhere I could breathe." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You're not alone anymore." Talon looked at her. She wasn't smiling, wasn't trying to make it sound like more than it was. Just stating a fact. "No," he said. "I guess I'm not." They finished eating in silence. Overhead, the stars came out thick and bright, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled salt. Elena stood, stretched. "I'm turning in." "I'll be in soon." She disappeared into the house, and Talon sat there alone, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, distant coyotes, the soft shuffle of goats in the lean-to. He thought about Maria, about the baby, about how he'd buried them and built walls so high nothing could get through. And now Elena was here, knocking holes in those walls without even trying. It scared him, but not enough to stop it. The next week passed without incident. They fell into a pattern, mornings feeding and mending, afternoons fixing whatever the storm had broken, evenings eating and cleaning up. Elena cooked better than Talon ever had, turning flour and canned goods into meals that actually tasted like something. She also talked more. Little things at first, stories about her father, about the town she'd left, about a dog she'd had as a kid who used to chase rabbits and never caught a single one. Talon found himself talking too. Not much, but more than he had in years. "You ever want kids?" Elena asked one night. The question hit harder than he expected. Talon set down his cup, stared at the table. "I had a son." "I know. I meant—" Again. He didn't answer right away. The idea of it, of trying again, of opening himself up to that kind of loss, felt impossible. I don't know, he said finally. You? Maybe. Someday. Elena traced the rim of her cup with one finger. If I found someone worth having them with. The air between them shifted, not uncomfortable, just aware. Talon cleared his throat. You should know the town's going to talk. About us. About you. Let them. It'll get worse before it gets better. I'm not afraid of talk, Talon. She met his eyes. I'm afraid of men who think they own me. Everything else is just noise. He believed her. 2 days later, the noise found them. Talon was fixing the fence when he saw the rider coming down the road. A man on a black horse, riding slow and deliberate. Not a rancher, not local. The suit gave him away, dark wool that didn't belong in the desert. Talon set down the hammer and walked toward the house. Elena was inside, kneading dough. She looked up when he came in. Someone's coming. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him outside. The rider stopped 20 feet from the house and dismounted. He was tall, maybe 40, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Everything about him screamed money and authority. Talon Red Mesa? The man called. Who's asking? The man reached into his coat. Talon tensed and pulled out a folded paper. My name is Victor Harrow. I'm here on legal business. Elena went rigid beside him. Talon glanced at her. Her face had gone pale, but her jaw was set. What kind of legal business? Talon asked. Harrow smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. The kind that concerns Miss Elena Vale. Mrs. Red Mesa, Talon corrected. Harrow's smile widened. Is that so? You have a marriage certificate? Talon didn't answer. Harrow stepped forward, holding out the paper. This is a contract signed by Miss Vale's father before his death. It stipulates that in the event of his debts remaining unpaid, his daughter would fulfill them through marriage to me. I've come to collect. Elena moved before Talon could stop her. She walked straight up to Harrow, ripped the paper from his hand, and tore it in half. That contract died with my father. Harrow didn't flinch. The court disagrees. I have a judge's order confirming the agreement. Then your judge is a liar and a crook, same as you. Careful, Miss Vale. Slander is a serious accusation. So is kidnapping. Elena threw the torn paper at his feet. I'm not going anywhere with you. Harrow sighed, like she was a child throwing a tantrum. You don't have a choice. The law is clear. You were promised to me. You ran, but running doesn't change the facts. Talon stepped between them. She's married to me. That makes her my wife, not your property. Do you have proof of that marriage, Mr. Red Mesa? Harrow's voice was calm, almost pleasant. A certificate? A witness? Anything that would hold up in court? Talon's silence was answer enough. Harrow nodded. I thought not. Which means Miss Vale is still legally bound to fulfill her father's agreement. I'll give you 1 week to prepare for the journey back east. After that, I'll return with a marshal, and we'll settle this the hard way. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat. Good day. He rode off, leaving dust and silence in his wake. Elena stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard. Talon could see her shaking. He can't do this, she said. He thinks he can. The law doesn't work like that. You can't own a person because their father owed you money. Out here, the law works however men like Harrow say it does. Talon turned to face her. How much did your father owe him? Enough that Harrow thinks I'm worth collecting. She looked at him, eyes blazing. I won't go. I don't care what paper he has. I won't. Then we fight him. How? Talon didn't have an answer yet, but he would find one. That night, Elena didn't sleep. Talon could hear her moving around the house, pacing, muttering to herself. He lay on the cot in the lean-to, staring at the ceiling, turning over every option. Harrow had money. He had connections. He probably had judges in his pocket and marshals who'd do what he paid them to do. But Talon had something too. He had land. He had Elena. And he had a stubborn streak that had kept him alive through a war and 3 years of drought. By morning, he had a plan. It wasn't much, but it was something. Elena was sitting at the table when he came in, eyes red from lack of sleep. We're going into town, Talon said. Why? We're getting married, legally, with a witness and a certificate. Elena stared at him. You think that'll stop him? I think it'll make it harder for him to drag you off without a fight. Talon poured himself coffee. And if he wants a fight, we'll give him one in court where people can see what kind of man he is. Courts don't care what kind of man he is. They care about contracts and debts, and they also care about married women. Talon set the cup down. A husband has rights, even out here. If you're legally my wife, Harrow can't just take you. He'd have to prove the contract supersedes the marriage. That'll take time. And time gives us options. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood. All right, let's do it. They rode into Mesquite Bend an hour later. The town was busier than usual. Market day, people crowding the boardwalks, wagons lined up outside the general store. Talon tied dust outside the church and helped Elena down. She looked nervous, and Talon couldn't blame her. Getting married to a stranger was one thing when it was an arrangement. Doing it because a man with a contract was breathing down your neck was something else. You sure about this? He asked. Are you? Talon nodded. Yeah. They walked inside. The church was small, plain, with wooden pews and a simple altar. A man in a worn black coat stood near the front, Reverend Hastings, who'd been preaching in Mesquite Bend longer than Talon had been alive. Hastings looked up when they entered. Surprise flickered across his face, then something closer to suspicion. Talon, wasn't expecting you. Need to get married. Hastings blinked. Married? This is Elena Vale. We want it done legal. Certificate, witness, everything. Hastings looked between them. This is rather sudden. It's not sudden. She's been living with me for 2 weeks. Still, Hastings clasped his hands. Marriage is a sacred bond, not something to rush into because we're not rushing. Elena stepped forward. We know what we're doing. We just need it done properly. Hastings studied her, then sighed. All right, but I'll need a witness. I'll find one, Talon said. He stepped outside and scanned the street. Most of the people out there wouldn't do it, either because they didn't like him or because they didn't want to get involved. Then he saw her. Mary Calloway, the schoolteacher. She was older, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She'd always been polite to Talon, never went out of her way to make him feel unwelcome. Miss Calloway. She turned surprised. Mr. Red Mesa. I need a favor. 5 minutes later, Mary stood inside the church, hands folded, looking both nervous and curious. Hastings opened his Bible. Let's begin. The ceremony was short. No music, no flowers. Just words spoken in a quiet room with dust motes floating in the sunlight. Do you, Talon Red Mesa, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Elena Vale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Elena's voice was steady. I do. Hastings pronounced them married. Talon signed the certificate. Elena signed. Mary signed as witness. It was done. They walked out into the sunlight, legally husband and wife. Mary touched Elena's arm. Good luck to you both. Thank you, Elena said. Mary hurried off, probably to tell half the town what she'd just witnessed. Talon and Elena stood on the church steps, not quite looking at each other. Well, Elena said, that's that. Yeah. You think it'll work? I think it's a start. They climbed onto dust and rode back toward the ranch. The sun was high, the air shimmering with heat. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but something had shifted. Talon could feel it. He didn't know if it was good or bad, just different. When they reached the house, Elena slid down from the horse and stood there, looking at the land, the broken fence, the lean-to, the hills beyond. This is mine now too, she said quietly. Yeah, she turned to him. I won't let Harrow take it. Or me. Neither will I. Elena nodded, and for the first time since Harrow had ridden up, she looked like she believed it. They went inside together. That night, Talon moved his things from the lean-to back into the house. Not into the bedroom. He wasn't ready for that, and neither was Elena. But into the main room, where he laid out his bedroll near the stove. It felt strange, crossing that threshold again, claiming space he'd given up weeks ago. But they were married now, on paper, in front of witnesses. And sleeping in the lean-to while his wife stayed in the house alone didn't sit right anymore. Elena didn't comment on it. She just watched him spread out the blanket, then turned back to the stove where she was heating water for coffee. You think Harrow knows yet? She asked. Probably. Town like this, news travels fast. Will it matter? Talon sat down at the table, rubbing his temples. Depends on how good his lawyer is. If he's smart, he'll argue that the contract predates the marriage, which means it takes precedence. If he's not smart, he'll just try to intimidate us into giving up. He already tried that. Then he'll try harder. Elena poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. Her hands wrapped around the cup, steadying. My father didn't know what he was doing when he signed that paper. Harrow got him drunk, talked about investments and opportunities, made it sound like a partnership. By the time my father realized what he'd agreed to, it was too late. When did he die? 6 months ago. Heart gave out. Her voice went flat. Harrow showed up 3 days after the funeral with the contract and a preacher, said we'd be married by the end of the week. So you ran. I took what money I could find and bought a train ticket west. Didn't even pack a bag. She looked up at him. I thought if I got far enough away, he'd forget about me, cut his losses. Men like Harrow don't cut losses. They double down. Elena's jaw tightened. Then I'll keep running, or we stand and fight. She studied him for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Helping me. You could have sent me back on the train the day I arrived, could have told Harrow to take me and saved yourself the trouble. Talon thought about that. He could have. Part of him had wanted to, that first day on the platform when he saw her step off the train looking nothing like what he'd expected. But somewhere between the storm and the lean-to collapsing and watching her splint a goat's leg without flinching, something had changed. I don't hand people over to men who think they own them, he said finally. Had enough of that in the war. Elena nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer but needed to hear it anyway. They drank their coffee in silence. Outside, a coyote howled, distant and lonesome. The sound echoed across the flats, swallowed by the darkness. What happens if the court sides with him? Elena asked. Then we leave. Pack up, head north, start over somewhere he can't reach. You do that? Give up this place? Talon looked around the room, the walls he'd built, the stove he'd hauled in piece by piece, the table he'd sanded down with his own hands. He'd put 3 years of his life into this ranch. 3 years of blood and sweat and grief. But it was still just land. Yeah, he said. I'd do that. Elena's eyes shimmered, just for a second, before she blinked it away. She stood, set her cup in the basin. I'm going to bed. Elena. She turned. We're going to win this, Talon said, one way or another. She didn't answer, just gave him a small, tired nod and disappeared into the bedroom. Talon sat there alone, listening to the house settle around him. He finished his coffee, banked the fire, and lay down on the bedroll. Sleep didn't come easy. His mind kept circling back to Harrow's face, that cold smile, the certainty in his voice. Talon had fought men before. He'd killed men before. But this wasn't a fight you could win with a gun. This was law and money and power, and he had none of those things. But he had one advantage. He knew how to lose everything and keep breathing. If it came to that, he'd do it again. The next morning, Talon woke to the smell of bacon. He sat up, disoriented, and saw Elena at the stove, hair loose around her shoulders, still in her nightdress with a shawl wrapped over it. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep. He stood, stretched, felt his spine crack. Yeah, me neither. They ate breakfast without talking much. The bacon was good, crispy and salty. Elena had fried eggs too, and there was bread left over from yesterday. It was the kind of meal that should have felt normal, domestic, but everything had a weight to it now. After they'd cleaned up, Talon went outside to check the fence. The morning was cool, the sky clear. He could see for miles in every direction, nothing but scrub and rock in the distant line of mesas. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, the kind of beauty that didn't care if you lived or died. Elena joined him a few minutes later, dressed for work. She had a hammer in one hand and a pocket full of nails. What are we fixing today? She asked. North fence? Posts are rotting. They worked through the morning, pulling out old posts and driving in new ones. The ground was hard, stubborn, and every swing of the sledge sent jolts up Talon's arms. But it felt good to work, to do something with his hands that had a clear beginning and end. Around midday, Elena stopped, shading her eyes. Someone's coming. Talon looked up. 2 riders this time, moving slow. One of them was wearing a badge. Marshal, Talon muttered. Elena's face went pale. Already? Looks like it. They walked toward the house together. The riders pulled up in the yard. A man Talon didn't recognize, maybe 30, with a star pinned to his vest, and beside him, Victor Harrow, looking as smug as he had 3 days ago. The marshal dismounted, tipped his hat. Mr. Red Mesa? That's me. Name's Deputy Frank Yates. I'm here on official business regarding Miss Elena Vale. Mrs. Red Mesa, Talon corrected again. Yates glanced at Harrow, who nodded slightly. Mr. Harrow here has shown me a legal contract stating that Miss Vale was promised to him in marriage to settle her father's debts. I'm here to enforce that contract. She's married to me, Talon said. I've got the certificate to prove it. Harrow spoke up, voice smooth as oil. A marriage entered into under fraudulent pretenses doesn't invalidate a prior legal obligation. Miss Vale knew about the contract when she fled. She knew she was bound to me. Marrying you was an attempt to circumvent the law. That's a lie, Elena said. Is it? Harrow pulled out another paper, unfolded it. This is a letter your father sent me 2 months before he died, confirming the arrangement and expressing his hope that you would honor it. He knew what he was doing, Miss Vale. And so did you. Elena's fists clenched. My father was manipulated. You got him drunk, and your father made a business decision. A poor one, perhaps, but legal nonetheless. Harrow looked at Yates. Deputy, I'd like Miss Vale placed in protective custody until the hearing. Talon stepped between them. She's not going anywhere. Yates sighed. Mr. Red Mesa, I don't want trouble. But if Mr. Harrow has a valid contract, and if the judge agrees, then I have to enforce it. Now, I'm willing to let this play out in court, but that means Miss Vale, Mrs. Red Mesa, needs to remain available for the proceedings. I'm not arresting her, just asking her to stay in town where I can keep an eye on things. No, Talon said flatly. Yates's hand moved toward his gun, not drawing, just resting there. I really don't want this to get ugly. Then leave, Harrow smiled. Deputy, I believe Mr. Red Mesa is interfering with the lawful execution of your duties. I believe Mr. Harrow is a liar and a crook, and I'm not letting him take my wife. Yates looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Look, I sympathize, but the law's the law. If you've got a marriage certificate, bring it to the hearing, present your case, let the judge decide. When's the hearing? Elena asked. 3 days, Mesquite Bend Courthouse. Elena looked at Talon, then back at Yates. I'll be there, but I'm staying here until then. Harrow opened his mouth to argue, but Yates held up a hand. That's fair. 3 days, Mrs. Red Mesa. If you don't show, I'll come back with a warrant. I'll be there, Elena said again. Yates nodded, clearly relieved to avoid a confrontation. He mounted up, but Harrow lingered, looking at Elena like she was a horse he'd already bought. See you in court, he said. Then they rode off. Elena stood there, shaking. Talon put a hand on her shoulder and she flinched, then steadied. 3 days, she said. We'll be ready. How? We don't have a lawyer. We don't have money for a lawyer. All we have is a piece of paper that says we're married, and Harrow's going to argue that doesn't mean anything. Talon turned her to face him. Then we argue it ourselves. You tell the truth. I back you up. We show that contract for what it is. A rich man trying to buy a woman because he thinks he can. And if the judge doesn't care, then we make him care. Elena searched his face, looking for certainty, for answers he didn't have. But what she found was enough. She nodded. All right. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Talon rode into town and found a man named Simon Clark, a clerk who worked at the land office. Clark was one of the few people in Mesquite Bend who'd never gone out of his way to make Talon feel unwelcome. He was quiet, bookish, the kind of man who cared more about maps and deeds than gossip. I need help, Talon said. Clark looked up from his desk, surprised. With what? Legal help. My wife's being threatened by a man with a contract. I need to know how to fight it. Clark listened while Talon explained. When Talon finished, Clark leaned back, thinking. The contract predates the marriage, which is a problem, Clark said. But there are precedents. If Elena can prove duress, that her father was coerced or mentally incapacitated when he signed, it might invalidate the whole thing. Can we prove that? Do you have witnesses? Anyone who saw Harrow manipulating her father? Talon shook his head. Her father's dead. It was just the two of them. Then it's her word against Harrow's. And Harrow has money, which means he has lawyers who know how to make her word sound worthless. Clark paused. But there's another angle. If you can show that Elena's marriage to you was entered in good faith, not as a scheme to avoid the contract, the judge might rule in your favor, especially if you can demonstrate that forcing her into marriage with Harrow would constitute involuntary servitude. How do we demonstrate that? You don't. She does. She has to speak for herself. She has to make the judge see her as a person, not property. Talon nodded slowly. She can do that. Then that's your best shot. Talon thanked him and rode back to the ranch. When he told Elena what Clark had said, she went quiet, staring at the wall. I have to convince a judge that I'm not property, she said. Yeah. And if I can't, then we leave. Tonight. Right now, if you want. Elena shook her head. No. I'm done running. If I run now, I'll be running the rest of my life. It might come to that anyway. Maybe. But at least I'll know I tried. She looked at him. You really think I can do this? I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. If anyone can, it's you. Something in her expression cracked, just for a second. Then she squared her shoulders. All right, then let's do it right. That night, they went over everything. Elena told Talon about her father, how he'd been a good man once, before the drink got him, how he'd tried to provide for her after her mother died, how Harrow had shown up with promises of loans and investments, and how her father had believed him because he'd wanted so desperately to believe someone. He didn't know Harrow would ask for me, Elena said, not until it was too late. Did he try to get out of it? He tried, but Harrow had lawyers, documents. He made it sound like the contract was ironclad. Her voice broke. My father died thinking he'd sold me. Talon reached across the table and took her hand. She squeezed back, hard. He didn't sell you, Talon said. Harrow stole you. There's a difference. Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. I just wish my father had known that too. They sat there for a while, hands clasped, neither one speaking. The day of the hearing came too fast. Talon woke before dawn, his stomach tight. Elena was already up, sitting at the table, dressed in the nicest thing she owned, a dark green dress she'd kept folded at the bottom of her bag. You look good, Talon said. I look terrified. That too. She almost smiled. They rode into Mesquite Bend just after sunrise. The courthouse was a squat adobe building near the center of town, with a wooden sign out front that read, Justice of the Peace. A small crowd had already gathered outside, townspeople who'd come to watch the spectacle. Talon helped Elena down from the horse, and they walked toward the entrance. People stared, whispered. Talon caught snatches of conversation. Can't believe she thinks she'll win. Harrow's got lawyers from back east. What did she expect, marrying a half-breed? Elena's hand found Talon's, and she held on tight. Inside, the courtroom was plain and cramped. Wooden benches lined the walls, and a desk sat at the front where the judge would preside. Harrow was already there, sitting with two men in expensive suits who looked like they'd never sweated a day in their lives. Harrow smiled when he saw them. Mrs. Red Mesa, so glad you could make it. Talon didn't answer. He led Elena to the front bench and they sat down. Simon Clark slipped in a few minutes later and sat beside them. I'll help where I can, Clark whispered. But you're going to have to do most of the talking. Understood, Elena said. The judge arrived at 9 sharp. A man named Abernathy, 60 years old, gray beard, eyes like chipped stone. He took his seat and banged a gavel. Let's get started. This is a hearing to determine the legal status of one Elena Vale, also known as Elena Red Mesa, in relation to a contract signed by her late father, Robert Vale. Mr. Harrow, you may present your case. One of Harrow's lawyers stood, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. He spoke in a clipped, efficient tone, laying out the facts as Harrow saw them. Robert Vale had borrowed money from Victor Harrow. Unable to repay, he'd signed a contract offering his daughter in marriage as settlement. The contract was legal, binding, and predated any marriage Elena may have entered into with Talon Red Mesa. The defense will argue that Mrs. Red Mesa's marriage invalidates the contract, the lawyer said. But we contend that the marriage was entered into fraudulently with the express purpose of avoiding Miss Vale's legal obligations. Therefore, The marriage should be annulled, and Miss Vale should be remanded to Mr. Harrow's custody to fulfill the terms of the contract. Judge Abernathy listened without expression. When the lawyer finished, he looked at Talon and Elena. "And your response?" Talon stood. "The contract is a lie. Elena's father was manipulated into signing it. He didn't understand what he was agreeing to, and Elena had no part in it. She came west to escape, and we married in good faith. She's my wife, legally, and Harrow has no claim on her." "Do you have evidence of manipulation?" "Just her word." "That's not evidence, Mr. Red Mesa." Harrow's lawyer smiled. Judge Abernathy turned to Elena. "Mrs. Red Mesa, do you have anything to say?" Elena stood slowly. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I have plenty to say." The courtroom went quiet. "My father made a mistake," Elena began. "He trusted a man who saw him as nothing more than a way to get what he wanted. Mr. Harrow didn't loan my father money out of kindness. He did it because he knew my father was desperate, and desperate men make bad decisions. He got my father drunk. He talked about investments and partnerships and opportunities. He made it sound like a business deal, and when my father signed that paper, he didn't know he was signing away his daughter." "Your father was an adult," the lawyer interrupted. "He knew what he was signing." "He was grieving," Elena shot back. "My mother had just died. He was drinking himself to death, and Harrow took advantage of that." "Can you prove it?" "No, because the only other person who was there is dead." The lawyer spread his hands. "Then, Your Honor, we have only Miss Vale's unsubstantiated claims against a legally binding contract." Judge Abernathy frowned. "Mrs. Red Mesa, do you have any witnesses? Anyone who can corroborate your story?" Elena hesitated. "No." "Then I'm afraid. But I can tell you what kind of man Victor Harrow is," Elena continued, her voice rising. "He's the kind of man who thinks he can buy people, who thinks a woman is property to be traded like livestock. He didn't want to marry me because he loved me. He wanted to marry me because I was part of a debt, and he collects debts." Harrow stood, calm and composed. "Your Honor, I resent the implication. I offered Miss Vale's father a fair loan with reasonable terms. When he couldn't repay, we came to an alternative arrangement. It's unfortunate that Miss Vale views it as something sinister, but business is business." "Business?" Elena's voice cracked. "You call owning another human being business? I call honoring a contract business. Then your contract is immoral, and I won't honor it." Judge Abernathy banged his gavel. "Mrs. Red Mesa, please control yourself." "Why?" Elena turned to face him. "So I can sit quietly while men decide what happens to my life? I've been quiet long enough. I ran across half the country to get away from this man, and I married Talon because I wanted to, not because I was trying to cheat anyone, not because I was desperate, because I chose him." She looked at Talon, and something passed between them, something real and raw and unspoken. "And if this court decides that my choice doesn't matter," Elena continued, "then this isn't justice. It's just another way for powerful men to control women they think they own." The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Abernathy leaned back, stroking his beard. "Strong words, Mrs. Red Mesa." "They're true words." He looked at Harrow. "Mr. Harrow, do you have anything to add?" Harrow stood, smoothing his jacket. "Only that I sympathize with Miss Vale's feelings. But feelings don't invalidate contracts. Her father made an agreement. I expect it to be honored." Judge Abernathy was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Talon. "Mr. Red Mesa, when did you marry Mrs. Red Mesa?" 4 days ago." "And do you have the certificate?" Talon pulled it from his pocket and handed it over. The judge examined it, checked the signatures, checked the date. "This appears legitimate," he said. Harrow's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, as we've stated, the marriage was entered into fraudulently." "Can you prove that?" Judge Abernathy asked. The lawyer hesitated. Timing suggests nothing. Unless you have evidence that Mr. and Mrs. Red Mesa conspired to defraud Mr. Harrow, this marriage stands." Harrow's face went tight. "Your Honor, I'm not finished." Judge Abernathy set the certificate down. "Mr. Harrow, your contract is problematic. You're asking me to enforce an agreement that treats a woman as collateral for a debt. That sits poorly with me. It's a legal contract. Legal doesn't always mean just." The judge's voice was sharp now. and I'm not inclined to tear apart a marriage just because you think you're owed something." Hope flared in Talon's chest, but he kept his face neutral. Judge Abernathy turned to Elena. "Mrs. Red Mesa, did you enter into this marriage willingly?" "Yes." "And Mr. Red Mesa, same question." "Yes," Talon said. The judge nodded. "Then here's my ruling. The marriage between Talon Red Mesa and Elena Red Mesa is legal and binding. Mr. Harrow's contract, while potentially valid in isolation, cannot supersede a legal marriage entered into in good faith. Therefore, I'm dismissing Mr. Harrow's claim." The courtroom erupted. People gasped, whispered, shouted. Harrow shot to his feet, face red. "This is outrageous. I have rights." "You have a piece of paper," Judge Abernathy said coldly. "Mrs. Red Mesa has a husband. Case dismissed." He banged the gavel. Harrow stared at the judge, then at Elena, his expression twisting into something ugly. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Elena said quietly. Harrow turned and stormed out, his lawyers scrambling after him. The courtroom slowly emptied, people filing out in shocked silence. Talon and Elena sat there, not moving. "We won," Elena whispered. "Yeah." She turned to him, eyes shining. "We actually won." Talon felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been clenched tight for days. "You won. You spoke up. You made him listen." Elena laughed, shaky and breathless. Then she threw her arms around Talon's neck and held on. He hesitated, then wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. For the first time since the storm, since the lean-to collapsed, since the day she'd arrived, Talon let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things might actually be all right. They stayed in each other's arms for longer than either of them expected. When Elena finally pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, and she wouldn't quite meet Talon's eyes. "We should go," she said. "Yeah." But neither of them moved. Simon Clark approached, clearing his throat. "Congratulations. That was well done." Elena turned to him, still a little unsteady. "Thank you for your help. I didn't do much." "You spoke for yourself, that's what mattered." Clark glanced toward the door where Harrow had disappeared. "But be careful, men like him don't take losing well." "I know," Elena said. Clark nodded and left. Talon and Elena walked out into the sunlight. The crowd outside had thinned, but the ones who remained stared openly. Some looked shocked. Others looked angry. A few looked like they might actually be pleased. Mary Calloway, the school teacher who'd witnessed their marriage, approached with a hesitant smile. "Mrs. Red Mesa, I'm glad it turned out the way it did." "Thank you, Miss Calloway." "If you need anything," Mary paused, choosing her words carefully. "Well, you know where to find me." It wasn't much, but it was something. Elena thanked her again, and Mary hurried off. Talon untied dust from the rail and helped Elena up. As they rode down the main street, he could feel eyes on them from every window, every doorway. The whispers would start again as soon as they were out of earshot. He knew that. But for once, he didn't care. They'd won. The ride back to the ranch was quiet at first. The sun was high, the air already shimmering with heat. Dust plodded along at her usual pace, unbothered by the drama of the morning. Elena broke the silence first. "Do you think Harrow will really let this go?" "No." "What do you think he'll do?" Talon thought about that. Men like Harrow had options. Money bought options. He could appeal, take it to a higher court, or he could try something else. "Like what?" "I don't know, but we'll be ready." Elena nodded, but Talon could see the tension in her shoulders. She'd stood up in court and won, but winning didn't mean the fight was over. It just meant they'd survived the first round. When they reached the ranch, Elena slid down from dust and stood looking at the house, the lean-to, the scrubby land stretching out in every direction. "It's really ours now," she said. "Was always ours. Just official now." She turned to him. "I meant what I said in there, about choosing you." Talon felt something tighten in his chest. "I know." "Do you?" He met her eyes. "Yeah, I do." Elena held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, color rising in her cheeks. "Good, because I don't say things I don't mean." "Neither do I." She smiled, small and genuine, then headed toward the house. Talon watched her go, then turned to unsaddle dust. The mare snorted, shaking her head like she had opinions about the whole situation. Yeah, I know, Talon muttered. I'm in over my head. That night they ate dinner at the table like always, but something had shifted. The air felt different, charged. Elena kept glancing at him, then looking away. Talon found himself doing the same thing. Finally, Elena set down her fork. We should talk about sleeping arrangements. Talon's throat went dry. What about them? You've been sleeping on the floor for almost a week. That can't be comfortable. It's fine. It's not fine. You built this house. You shouldn't be sleeping on the floor in your own home. Where else am I supposed to sleep? Elena looked at him like he was being deliberately difficult. In the bed. With me. The words hung in the air between them. Talon cleared his throat. Elena. We're married. Legally married. People saw us in court. They know we're together. She paused. And I'm not asking you to. We don't have to. I know what you're saying. Then why are you arguing? Because I don't want you to feel like you have to. I don't feel like I have to. I'm offering. Elena's voice softened. Talon, we've been living together for weeks. We've worked side by side. We fought for this. I'm not afraid of you, and I don't think you're afraid of me. No, I'm not. Then what are you afraid of? Talon didn't answer right away. The truth was complicated. He was afraid of getting too close, afraid of losing someone again, afraid that if he let himself feel something real, the desert would take it away like it took everything else. But Elena was still looking at him, waiting, and he owed her honesty. I'm afraid of what happens if I let myself care, he said quietly. Elena's expression softened. I'm afraid of that too, but I'm more afraid of living like I'm already dead. She stood, walked around the table, and held out her hand. Talon looked at it for a long moment, then he took it. Elena led him into the bedroom. It was small, just enough space for the bed and a trunk. The window faced west, and the last light of the day slanted through, painting everything gold. They stood there, awkward and uncertain. Then Elena laughed, breaking the tension. This is strange, isn't it? Yeah. I've never done this before. Shared a bed with someone, I mean. Me neither. Not like this. Elena squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out. They did. Slowly. Carefully. Elena changed into her nightdress while Talon waited outside. When she called him back in, she was already under the blanket, leaving room on the other side. Talon blew out the lantern, stripped down to his undershirt and trousers, and climbed in beside her. The bed was narrow. Their shoulders touched. Talon could hear Elena breathing, smell the faint scent of soap in her hair. Good night, she whispered. Good night. They lay there in the darkness, not touching beyond that point of contact, both wide awake. Eventually, exhaustion won. Talon felt Elena's breathing slow and deepen. He closed his own eyes and let sleep take him. He woke once in the night to find Elena curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. He didn't move, just lay there, listening to her breathe, feeling the warmth of her against him. Felt right. Morning came too soon. Talon woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Elena was already up, already dressed, already moving. He sat up, rubbing his face, and joined her in the main room. Sleep all right? She asked. Yeah. You? Better than I have in months. They drank coffee and ate breakfast, falling back into the rhythm of work. There were goats to feed, fences to check, water to haul. The ranch didn't care about court hearings or marriage certificates. It just kept demanding attention. Around midday, a rider appeared on the horizon. Talon tensed, but as the figure got closer, he relaxed. It was Simon Clark. Clark dismounted, looking apologetic. Sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Harrow left town this morning. Left? Elena asked. Took the train east. His lawyers went with him. Talon frowned. That was fast. Too fast, Clark agreed. I don't trust it. Men like Harrow don't just give up and leave. You think he's planning something? I think he's regrouping. He lost in court, but he's got money and connections. He could come back with something worse. Like what? I don't know, but I'd stay alert. Talon nodded. We will. Thanks for the warning. Clark tipped his hat and rode off. Elena stood beside Talon, watching him go. He's right, she said. This isn't over. Maybe not, but we've got time to prepare. They went back to work, but Talon's mind kept circling Clark's warning. Harrow had left too easily. Men like that didn't walk away from a fight. They just changed tactics. 2 days passed. Then 3. No sign of Harrow, no letters, no threats. The town seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm, though people still stared when Talon and Elena rode through. On the 4th day, Elena was in the garden, a small patch of dirt she'd started clearing near the house, when she heard voices. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and saw 3 women approaching. She recognized one of them, Mary Calloway. The other 2 were strangers. One was older, gray-haired, carrying a basket. The other was younger, maybe Elena's age, with a friendly face. "Mrs. Red Mesa," Mary called. "I hope we're not intruding." Elena walked toward them, wary. "Not at all." "This is Mrs. Hutchins," Mary said, gesturing to the older woman. "And this is Sarah Brennan. We thought we'd come by and, well, welcome you properly." Mrs. Hutchins held out the basket. "I brought bread and preserves. Thought you might be able to use them." Elena took the basket, surprised. "Thank you." Sarah Brennan smiled. "We also wanted to say that what you did in court, standing up for yourself like that, it was brave. I didn't have much choice." "You had every choice," Mrs. Hutchins said firmly, "and you made the right one. Not many women would have had the courage." Elena didn't know what to say. She'd expected suspicion, maybe hostility. Not this. "Would you like to come inside?" she asked. They did. Elena made tea, real tea, which she'd been saving, and they sat around the table. The women asked careful questions about where Elena was from, how she and Talon were managing, whether she needed anything. "The town's been talking," Mary admitted. "Some of it's not kind, but there are people who admire what you did, people who think it's about time someone stood up to men like Harrow." "I didn't do it to make a point," Elena said. "I did it to survive." "That's exactly why it matters," Mrs. Hutchins said. "You didn't wait for someone to save you. You saved yourself." Sarah leaned forward. "If you ever need help with the garden or sewing or anything, you can come find me. I live just east of town." Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She'd been so focused on fighting, on surviving, that she hadn't realized how isolated she'd become. Having other women here, offering friendship, felt like a lifeline. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate it." They stayed for an hour, talking about small things, recipes, weather, the upcoming harvest. When they left, Elena stood in the doorway and watched them walk back toward town. Talon came around the side of the house, saw her standing there. "Who were they?" "Friends, I think." He raised an eyebrow. "That's new." "Yeah?" Elena smiled. "It is." That night she told Talon about the visit. He listened, surprised and a little suspicious. "You think they're genuine?" he asked. "I think some people are tired of the way things have always been, and maybe they see us as something different. Different's not always good out here." "No, but sometimes it is." Talon thought about that. He'd spent so long believing the town would never accept him that he'd stopped trying, but Elena had walked in and changed the rules in a matter of weeks. "You're dangerous," he said. Elena grinned. "Good." Another week passed. The ranch started to look better. The fence was solid. The lean-to was holding. The young doe's leg was healing and she was putting weight on it again. Elena's garden was starting to sprout green shoots. And slowly, carefully, Talon and Elena were learning how to be married. It wasn't smooth. They argued about small things, how to stack firewood, whether the goats needed more feed, the best way to patch a roof. But the arguments didn't feel dangerous. They felt normal. One night, after a particularly heated debate about whether to sell 2 goats or try to breed them, Elena threw up her hands. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met. You're not exactly easy yourself." "I know. That's why this works." Talon blinked. "What?" Elena sat down, suddenly serious. "I'm stubborn. You're stubborn. Neither of us backs down when we believe we're right. But we also listen. We compromise. That's more than most marriages have. We've been married 3 weeks. And we haven't killed each other yet. I'd call that progress." Talon laughed despite himself. "Fair point." Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "I know this wasn't what either of us planned, but I'm glad it happened." Talon squeezed her hand. "Yeah. Me too. They sat there for a moment, hands linked, the lantern flickering between them. Then Elena stood, pulling him up with her. Come on, let's go to bed before we start another argument. Yes, ma'am. They settled into a routine. Work during the day, meals together, evenings spent talking or sitting in comfortable silence. At night they slept beside each other, and gradually the awkwardness faded. Talon woke one morning to find Elena's arm draped across his chest, her face peaceful in sleep. He didn't move, just lay there, memorizing the moment. It didn't last. 3 weeks after the court hearing, Deputy Yates rode up to the ranch with a grim expression. Talon saw him coming and met him in the yard. What is it? Yates dismounted, looking uncomfortable. I need to talk to you and Mrs. Red Mesa. Elena came out of the house, wiping her hands on a towel. Deputy. Ma'am. Yates pulled a folded paper from his coat. This came in on the train this morning. It's from a judge in Santa Fe. Harrow filed an appeal. Talon's jaw tightened. He's not giving up. No, sir. And this judge, Judge Whitmore, he's known for siding with creditors in debt cases. He's agreed to hear Harrow's appeal in 2 weeks. Where? Elena asked. Santa Fe. You'll both need to be there. And if we don't go? Then the ruling goes in Harrow's favor by default. Elena looked at Talon. We go. It's a 3-day ride, Yates said. Maybe 4. You'll need to leave soon if you're going to make it. We'll make it, Talon said. Yates nodded, handed over the paper, and rode off. Talon and Elena stood in the yard, staring at the summons. He's not going to stop, Elena said. No. Then we fight him again. In Santa Fe. In front of a judge who's already biased against us. Elena turned to him, eyes fierce. I don't care where we fight him or who the judge is. I'm not letting Harrow win. Not now. Not ever. Talon felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years. Something close to pride. Then we go to Santa Fe. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Talon sold 3 goats to raise money for the trip. Elena packed food, clothes, everything they'd need for the journey. Simon Clark helped them draft a response to the appeal, outlining their case. Whitmore's tough, Clark warned, but he's not corrupt. If you present a strong case, he'll listen. What's a strong case? Elena asked. Same as before. Prove the contract was signed under duress. Prove your marriage was legitimate. And don't let Harrow's lawyers intimidate you. They won't, Elena said. The morning they left, the sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain. Talon saddled dust and packed the saddlebags while Elena checked the house one last time. You think the ranch will be all right while we're gone? She asked. It's survived worse. They rode out just after dawn. The road to Santa Fe was long and rough, cutting through high desert and rocky hills. They camped at night under the stars, sharing a single bedroll for warmth. On the 3rd night, Elena lay beside Talon, staring up at the sky. What are you thinking about? Talon asked. Everything. The hearing. Harrow. What happens if we lose? We won't. You don't know that. No, but I know we're not going to roll over and let him take you. Elena turned to look at him. What if the judge rules against us anyway? Then we disappear, change our names, head north or west, start over. You'd really do that? I already told you I would. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I love you. The words hit Talon like a physical blow. He turned to face her, and in the dim firelight he could see her eyes shining. I know it's fast, she continued. I know we're still figuring this out. But it's true. I love you. Talon's throat tightened. He'd spent 3 years telling himself he'd never feel this again, never let himself be that vulnerable. But here was Elena, brave and fierce and terrified, saying the thing he'd been too afraid to even think. I love you too, he said. Elena's breath caught. Then she smiled, wide and real, and kissed him. It was the first time they'd kissed. It was tentative and a little clumsy, but it was theirs. When they pulled apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. Whatever happens in Santa Fe, we face it together. Together, Talon agreed. They reached Santa Fe on the 4th day, dusty and tired. The city was bigger than Mesquite Bend, busier, full of merchants and travelers and people who didn't look twice at a man with Apache blood or a woman traveling with him. The hearing was set for the next morning. Talon and Elena found a cheap boarding house and paid for a room. They cleaned up as best they could, ate a small meal, and tried to sleep. Talon lay awake most of the night, listening to Elena breathe beside him, thinking about everything they stood to lose. Morning came gray and cold. They dressed in their best clothes and walked to the courthouse, a large adobe building near the center of town. Harrow was already there, flanked by his lawyers. He smiled when he saw them, cold and confident. "Mr. and Mrs. Red Mesa, how nice of you to join us." Talon didn't respond. He led Elena inside and they took their seats. Judge Whitmore entered at 9 sharp. He was older than Judge Abernathy, with a hawkish face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Let's begin," he said. Harrow's lawyer stood and presented the same case as before, but with more polish. He argued that the original judge had been swayed by emotion rather than law, that the contract was binding and predated the marriage, that Elena's marriage to Talon was a transparent attempt to evade her legal obligations. "The law is clear, Your Honor," the lawyer concluded. "Contracts must be honored. Miss Vale cannot escape her father's debts by simply marrying someone else." Judge Whitmore listened without expression. Then he looked at Talon and Elena. "Your response?" Talon stood. He'd prepared what he was going to say, practiced it in his head a dozen times. But now, standing in front of this judge, the words felt inadequate, so he spoke from the heart instead. "Your Honor, the contract Mr. Harrow is trying to enforce treats my wife like property. It says that because her father owed money, she owes her life. That's not law. That's slavery." "Strong words, Mr. Red Mesa." "They're true words. Elena didn't sign that contract. She didn't agree to it. She was sold without her consent, and now a man she doesn't know is trying to force her into marriage because he thinks the law gives him that right." "The law does give me that right," Harrow interrupted. "No," Elena said, standing. "It doesn't." Judge Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Red Mesa?" Elena stepped forward, hands steady. "My father made a mistake, but his mistake doesn't mean I lose my freedom. I came west to escape Mr. Harrow. I married Talon because I wanted to build a life with him. Not because I was running, because I was choosing." "And yet you married him only days before the first hearing," Harrow's lawyer said. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" "I married him when I was ready," Elena shot back. "And whether that was convenient or not doesn't change the fact that I made a choice. My choice. Not my father's, not Mr. Harrow's. Mine." The courtroom was silent. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Mrs. Red Mesa, do you love your husband?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Yes." "And Mr. Red Mesa, do you love your wife?" "Yes," Talon said. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. "Mr. Harrow, I've reviewed the contract. It's legal as far as contracts go. But it's also deeply troubling. You're asking me to dissolve a marriage and force a woman into your custody against her will. That sits poorly with me. Your Honor, the law? I know what the law says, Mr. Harrow. I also know what justice requires." He paused. "I'm ruling in favor of Mr. and Mrs. Red Mesa. The marriage stands. Your contract does not supersede it." Harrow's face went white. "This is an outrage. This is my courtroom, and my ruling is final." Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. "Case dismissed." The world seemed to stop. Then Elena turned to Talon, and they grabbed each other, holding on like they might fall apart if they let go. They'd won. Again. Harrow stood frozen, staring at the judge in disbelief. Then he turned and stormed out, his lawyers scrambling after him. Talon and Elena did not care. They walked out of the courthouse into the cold morning air, and for the first time in weeks they breathed easy. "It's really over," Elena said. "Yeah, it's over." They stood there on the steps, holding hands, watching the city move around them. Then they went home. The ride back to the ranch took 5 days. They moved slower than they had on the way to Santa Fe, letting dust set the pace, stopping when they felt like it instead of pushing through exhaustion. There was no rush anymore, no deadline hanging over them, no threat waiting at the end of the road. On the second night, they made camp near a creek that actually had water in it. Elena knelt at the edge, splashing her face, and when she looked up, she was smiling in a way Talon had never seen before. Unguarded, free. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing, just, you look different." "Different how?" "Happy." Elena stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. I am happy. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I actually feel like I can breathe. Talon understood that. He'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. But watching Elena now, seeing the lightness in her movements, he realized he was starting to remember. They ate dinner by the fire, beans and hard bread, nothing special. And afterward, Elena leaned against Talon's shoulder, staring into the flames. What do you want to do when we get back? She asked. Same as always. Fix what's broken. Keep the goats alive. Try not to let the desert kill us. Elena laughed. That's it? That's your grand plan? It's kept me alive this long. Well, I have a plan too. Yeah? I want to expand the garden, plant more than we need so we can sell the extra in town. Maybe get chickens, build a proper barn instead of that lean-to. She paused. And I want to paint the house. Talon raised an eyebrow. Paint it? Yes. White, maybe? Or yellow? Something that doesn't look like every other sad adobe shack in the territory. Yellow, Talon repeated, trying to picture it. You don't like yellow. I don't know. Never thought about it. Elena poked him in the ribs. Well, start thinking about it, because I'm tired of living in a house that looks like it's given up. Talon smiled despite himself. Yellow it is then. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek and the wind in the scrub. Then Elena said, Tell me about your wife, your first wife. Talon stiffened. He'd mentioned Maria before, but only in passing, never the whole story. You don't have to, Elena added quickly. I want to know who you were before I met you. Talon took a breath. Her name was Maria. We met during the war. I was stationed near her family's ranch, and she used to bring food to the soldiers. She didn't care that I was Apache. Didn't care what anyone thought. He paused, remembering. We got married right after the war ended, built the ranch together. She was pregnant by the next spring. What happened? Fever. It came through in winter, hit her and the baby both. There was nothing I could do. I rode to town for the doctor, but by the time we got back, they were gone. His voice cracked. I buried them on the hill behind the house. Haven't been up there since. Elena's hand found his. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, it didn't. Elena squeezed his hand. You don't have to carry that alone anymore. You know that, right? Talon looked at her. In the firelight, her eyes were soft, understanding. She wasn't trying to fix him or tell him to move on. She was just offering to stand beside him while he figured out how. Yeah, he said. I know. They reached the ranch on the 6th day, just as the sun was setting. The house looked exactly the same, small, weathered, stubborn, but somehow it felt different, like it had been waiting for them. Talon helped Elena down from dust, and they stood in the yard, taking it all in. Home, Elena said quietly. Yeah. They unloaded their things and checked on the goats. All 12 were still alive, the young doe walking almost normally now. The water tank was low, but not dangerously so. The fence had held. Everything was as they'd left it. That night, they slept in their own bed, and for the first time there was no awkwardness, no hesitation. They lay facing each other, close enough that Talon could see the faint freckles across Elena's nose. We did it, Elena whispered. We did. I love you. I love you too. Elena kissed him, and this time it wasn't tentative or uncertain. It was sure, real, the beginning of something neither of them had thought they'd ever have again. The next morning, Talon woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of hammering. He dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Elena on the roof, prying up loose shingles. What are you doing? He called. Fixing the leak. You said it drips when it rains. I was going to do that. Now you don't have to. Talon shook his head, smiling. He grabbed a ladder and climbed up to help her. Over the next few weeks, they threw themselves into the work. Elena expanded the garden, clearing rocks and hauling in soil from the creek bed. Talon built a chicken coop using scrap lumber and wire. They patched the roof, reinforced the fence, and dug a new irrigation ditch that actually held water. It was hard, exhausting work, but it felt different now. Before, Talon had been working just to survive, to keep the land from swallowing him whole. Now he was building something that might actually last. One afternoon, Elena came back from town with 2 chickens in a crate and a can of yellow paint. You were serious about that, Talon said, looking at the paint. Completely serious. They spent the next 2 days painting the house. Elena worked on the front while Talon tackled the sides. The yellow was brighter than he'd expected, almost cheerful. When they finished and stepped back to look at it, Talon had to admit it made a difference. It looks good, he said. It looks like someone actually lives here, Elena corrected. Like it's a home, not just a place to sleep. She was right. Word of the yellow house spread through Mesquite Bend faster than Talon would have thought possible. Within a week, people were riding out just to see it. Some came to mock. Others came out of curiosity. But a few, like Mary Calloway and Sarah Brennan, came to visit Elena and see how she was settling in. Sarah brought seeds for the garden. Mary brought fabric for curtains. Even Mrs. Hutchins stopped by with a recipe for preserving vegetables. You've caused quite a stir, Mrs. Hutchins said, sipping tea at Elena's table. People are talking about you, about what you did in court. Let them talk, Elena said. Oh, they will, but it's not all bad. Some of the younger women, the ones with husbands who think they can do whatever they please, they're starting to ask questions, starting to wonder if maybe they don't have to put up with things they've been putting up with. Elena looked surprised. I didn't mean to start anything. Maybe not. But you did. And that matters. After Mrs. Hutchins left, Elena sat at the table staring at her cup. You all right? Talon asked. I never thought about it like that. That standing up for myself might mean something to other people. It does, whether you meant it to or not. Elena nodded slowly. Then I guess I better keep doing it. Guess so. Not everyone in town was pleased, of course. Cutter and his friends still muttered when Talon rode through. The shopkeeper, Bosch, still overcharged when he thought he could get away with it. But there was a shift happening, subtle but real. People who used to look through Talon now nodded when they passed. Women who used to whisper about Elena now asked her advice. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was a start. One evening in late autumn, Talon was mending a saddle when he heard a horse approaching. He looked up to see Deputy Yates riding in, and his stomach clenched. Visits from the law were never good news. Yates dismounted, looking uncomfortable. Evening, Talon. Deputy? Elena came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Is something wrong? No, ma'am. Just the opposite, actually. Yates pulled an envelope from his coat. This came for you, from Santa Fe. Elena took it, frowning. She opened it and read quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. What is it? Talon asked. Elena looked up, eyes wide. It's from Judge Whitmore. He says... She stopped, reading again to make sure. He says Harrow's been arrested. For what? Fraud, extortion. Turns out we weren't the first people he tried this with. After our case, other victims started coming forward. The judge launched an investigation, and they found evidence of multiple fraudulent contracts. Harrow's in jail, awaiting trial. Talon stared at her. He's really done? Looks like it. Yates nodded. Judge wanted you to know. Said you helped bring a criminal to justice, even if that wasn't what you set out to do. Elena handed the letter to Talon. He read it himself, just to be sure. It was real. Harrow wasn't coming back. The threat was over. Thank you, Deputy, Elena said. Yates tipped his hat. Congratulations, Mrs. Red Mesa. You earned this. After he left, Talon and Elena stood in the yard holding the letter, not quite believing it. It's really over, Elena said. Yeah. She turned to him, eyes shining. We're free. Talon pulled her close, and they stood there together as the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Winter came hard that year. The first snow arrived in December, covering the ranch in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Talon and Elena spent the cold months huddled by the stove working on small projects. Elena sewing curtains, Talon carving a new handle for the axe. They talked more than Talon had talked in years. About the future. About what they wanted. About whether they were ready for children. I think I am, Elena said one night. Ready, I mean. Talon looked at her, heart pounding. You sure? As sure as I've ever been about anything. She paused. Are you? Talon thought about that. He thought about Maria and the baby he'd lost. About the fear that had kept him from even imagining this. But when he looked at Elena, strong, fierce, alive, the fear didn't feel so big anymore. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." Elena smiled, and that night they started trying. Spring came slowly, reluctantly. The snow melted, the creek filled, and the garden began to show signs of life. Elena's chickens started laying, and she sold the extra eggs in town. The goats had kids, 3 of them, healthy and loud. And in April, Elena missed her monthly cycle. She didn't say anything at first, not wanting to get Talon's hopes up. But when she missed the second one, she told him, "I think I'm pregnant." Talon froze. "You think?" "I'm pretty sure." He stared at her, 1,000 emotions crashing through him at once. Fear, hope, joy, terror. Elena took his hand. "Say something." His voice cracked. "Are you sure?" "No, but all the signs are there." She paused. "Are you happy?" Talon pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she gasped. "Yeah, I'm happy." They rode into town the next week to see the doctor, an old man named Fitzgerald who'd been practicing medicine longer than Talon had been alive. He examined Elena, asked questions, and finally nodded. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Red Mesa. About 2 months along, I'd say." Elena's hand found Talon's, squeezing hard. "When?" Talon asked. "Late November, early December, if all goes well." "If all goes well?" The words hung in the air, heavy with all the things that could go wrong. Fitzgerald must have seen the fear on Talon's face because he added, "She's healthy, strong. I don't see any reason to expect complications, but you'll want to take it easy. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest." Elena nodded, but Talon could see she was already calculating how much work needed doing before winter. Over the next few months, Talon watched Elena's body change. Her belly grew, slowly at first, then more noticeably. She moved differently, carefully, one hand often resting on the swell of her stomach. Talon found himself terrified and amazed in equal measure. He'd been through this before, but it hadn't ended well. Every time Elena winced or complained of pain, his heart stopped. But she was strong, stronger than Maria had been, and she had help this time. Sarah Brennan visited often, bringing advice and supplies. Mary Calloway checked in weekly. Even Mrs. Hutchins stopped by, offering to help when the time came. "You've got people now," Mrs. Hutchins said to Elena. "You're not alone in this." Elena's eyes welled up. "Thank you." In September, Talon started preparing. He built a cradle from cottonwood, sanding it smooth so there were no rough edges. Elena sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her hands steady even as her belly grew bigger. One evening, they sat outside watching the sunset. Elena's hand rested on her stomach, and Talon saw the baby kick, a visible ripple under her dress. "Did you see that?" Elena asked. "Yeah." "Want to feel?" Talon hesitated, then placed his hand where hers had been. A moment later, he felt it, a small, firm push against his palm. His throat tightened. "That's our baby." "Yeah." They sat there in the fading light, Talon's hand on Elena's belly, feeling their child move. And for the first time since Maria died, Talon let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could turn out all right. The baby came in late November, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Elena woke Talon in the middle of the night, her face tight with pain. "It's time." Talon's mind went blank with panic. Then training kicked in. He got Elena comfortable, sent word to Mrs. Hutchins and Sarah, and boiled water like the doctor had told him. Mrs. Hutchins arrived first, took one look at Elena, and started barking orders. Sarah came 20 minutes later. They worked together, calm and efficient, while Talon paced outside, useless and terrified. Labor lasted 6 hours. Talon heard Elena cry out, heard her cursing, heard Mrs. Hutchins telling her to push. He'd never felt so helpless in his life. Then he heard it, a thin, angry wail. The door opened. Sarah stepped out, smiling. "You have a daughter." Talon's knees almost gave out. "Elena?" "She's fine. Tired, but fine. Go see your family." Talon stepped inside. Elena lay in bed, sweaty and pale, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come here," she whispered. Talon crossed the room on shaking legs and looked down at his daughter. She was small, red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that hadn't quite decided what color they'd be. "She's perfect," Talon said. "She's ours," Elena corrected. Talon sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle them. Elena shifted the baby into his arms, and he held her, terrified he'd break her. "What do we name her?" Elena asked. Talon had been thinking about that for weeks. "How about Rose?" Elena smiled. "Rose. I like that." Rose Red Mesa, their daughter. Talon looked at Elena, at the baby in his arms, at the life they'd built from nothing, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The first few months were brutal. Rose woke every 2 hours, screaming for food. Elena was exhausted, running on almost no sleep. Talon did what he could, changing diapers, rocking Rose when Elena needed to rest, keeping the house running. But slowly, things settled. Rose started sleeping longer. Elena's strength returned, and the ranch kept going because it always did. By spring, Rose was 6 months old, fat and healthy, with a smile that could melt Talon's heart in seconds. Elena started working the garden again, Rose strapped to her back in a sling Sarah had made. One afternoon, Talon came back from mending the fence to find Elena in the garden, Rose babbling happily while Elena pulled weeds. "You're supposed to be resting," Talon said. "I've rested enough. Besides, she likes being outside." Rose reached for Talon, and he took her, lifting her high. She giggled, and the sound was the best thing he'd ever heard. "We did good," Elena said, watching them. "Yeah, we did." That summer, something unexpected happened. A young couple arrived at the ranch looking for work. They'd heard about Talon and Elena, about the court case, about the yellow house, about the woman who'd stood up to a rich man and won. "We're looking for a place where we can work hard and be treated fair," the man said. His name was Daniel, and his wife was called Anna. "We heard you might need help." Talon and Elena exchanged glances. They did need help. The ranch was growing, and with Rose to care for, there was more work than 2 people could handle. "We can't pay much," Talon said. "We're not asking for much, just a fair wage and a place to stay." They hired Daniel and Anna. Talon built them a small cabin on the far side of the property, and they worked harder than Talon had expected. Daniel was good with animals. Anna helped Elena with the garden and the chickens. Within a year, 2 more families arrived, drawn by the same stories. Talon and Elena's ranch wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was becoming something bigger, a community. By the time Rose turned 2, the ranch had changed completely. There were 4 cabins now, a proper barn, a smokehouse, and a larger garden that produced more than they could eat. Elena sold vegetables and eggs in town every week, and the money they made went back into improvements. The town changed too, slowly, grudgingly. But it changed. Cutter stopped muttering when Talon rode by. Bosch stopped overcharging. People who used to cross the street to avoid Talon now stopped to ask how the ranch was doing. It wasn't perfect. There were still people who looked at Talon and saw only his Apache blood. Still people who thought Elena had gotten too big for her britches. But there were also people who respected what they'd built. People who saw them as proof that hard work and stubbornness could win, even in the harshest land. One afternoon, Mary Calloway brought her students out to the ranch for a lesson on farming. Elena showed them the garden, explained how to plant and water and harvest. The kids listened, wide-eyed, asking questions. Afterward, Mary pulled Elena aside. "You're a hero to some of these girls, especially the ones whose fathers don't think they're worth much." Elena looked uncomfortable. "I'm not a hero. I just did what I had to do." "That's what makes you one." That night, Elena told Talon about the conversation. "Do you think she's right?" Elena asked. "That I'm some kind of hero?" Talon thought about that. "I think you're someone who refused to break. And yeah, that means something, especially to people who feel like they're breaking every day." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I hope Rose grows up knowing she doesn't have to accept things just because someone says that's the way it is." "She will, because she's got you for a mother." By the time Rose turned 5, the ranch was thriving. They had 20 goats, a dozen chickens, 2 cows, and fields that actually produced crops. Daniel and Anna had a baby of their own. The other families were talking about building a schoolhouse so the kids didn't have to ride into town. Talon stood on the hill behind the house one evening, looking down at everything they'd built. The yellow house, the barn, the cabins with smoke rising from their chimneys, the fields green with growing things. Elena climbed the hill to join him, Rose running ahead. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked. "How far we've come." "Yeah." Elena slipped her hand into his. "You ever regret it, writing that letter?" Talon looked at her, this woman who'd stepped off a train with a single bag and changed his entire life. "Not once." "Good. Because I don't regret answering it." Rose ran up, breathless. "Papa, can we go see the goats?" "Sure, sweetheart." They walked down the hill together, hand in hand, Rose skipping ahead. And Talon realized something he hadn't let himself believe for a long time. He was happy. Not the kind of happiness that came easy or lasted forever without effort, but the kind that was built from dirt and sweat and two people refusing to give up on each other. That night, after Rose was asleep, Talon and Elena sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "You think we'll keep growing?" Elena asked. "The ranch, I mean." "I think as long as we keep working, yeah." "What if it gets too big? What if we can't manage it? Then we figure it out, same as we always do." Elena leaned against him. "I like that answer." They sat in silence for a while. Then Elena said, "I want another baby." Talon's heart skipped. "Yeah?" "Yeah. Rose should have a sibling, someone to fight with and play with and drive us crazy with." Talon smiled. "All right, let's have another baby." Elena kissed him, and in that kiss was everything they'd built and everything they still wanted to build. Their second child, a boy they named Samuel, was born the following spring. He came easier than Rose had, and he was loud from the start. Rose was fascinated, constantly trying to hold him, to help with him, to show him her toys even though he was too young to care. Life got busier, louder, messier. But Talon wouldn't have changed it for anything. Years passed. The ranch grew. Rose and Samuel grew. More families came, drawn by stories of a place where hard work mattered more than who your parents were or what you looked like. Talon's hair started going gray. Elena's hands grew rough from work, but her eyes stayed bright. They argued about things that didn't matter and agreed on the things that did. They buried animals and celebrated births and weathered droughts and storms. And through it all, they stood together. One evening, when Talon was 50 and Elena was 47, they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Rose had married Daniel and Anna's son. Samuel was courting a girl from town. The ranch was run by 3 families now, all working together. "You think we did all right?" Elena asked. Talon looked at her, this woman who'd come west with nothing and built everything. "Yeah, I think we did all right." "Good." Elena squeezed his hand. "Because I wouldn't change a single thing." Talon thought about that, about the fear and the pain and the fights and the doubt, about standing in a courtroom facing a man who thought he owned her, about nights spent wondering if the desert would finally win. "Me neither," he said. "Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who'll fight beside you when everything goes to hell. Someone who won't break when the world tries to break them. Someone who chooses you, every day, even when it's hard." Elena had chosen him. He'd chosen her. And together, they'd built something that mattered. Not because it was easy, but because they refused to let it be anything less than what they deserved. That night, after Elena had gone to bed, Talon climbed the hill behind the house one last time. He stood at the graves he'd dug so long ago, the ones he hadn't visited since the day he buried Maria and their son. "I'm all right now," he said quietly. "I wanted you to know that." The wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Talon turned and walked back down to the yellow house, where his wife was waiting and his children were sleeping and his life was full of noise and mess and everything he'd never thought he'd have again. And he was grateful for all of it.